So we have two types of disaster. One is the natural disaster. The other one is called as the man-made disaster. So drought would definitely create a severe impact into the minds of the people, will create a severe impact in the life of the people. For the government, for the people, and for the society, it becomes a very big challenge in rebuilding the system altogether. Good morning and welcome to the second session of Disaster Management Unit 1. In the last session, we have introduced the topic about what is disaster management, why disaster management has become an important topic for all of us today, and what are the kinds of disaster management that we have been facing altogether. But in this session, we are going to talk about a very, very important concept called as the factors of the disaster management. Now, a disaster is actually a result from the combination of hazard, vulnerability, insufficient capacity to measure and to reduce the potential risk. We know what are the factors that are being involved in terms of the disaster factor. Now, we are going to classify and understand the same disaster going forward. What is the classification of disasters altogether? Primarily, we have the natural disaster and the man-made disaster. Now, the word disaster itself is something quite dangerous or quite something which is fearful in nature for most of us. So we all believe that disaster itself should be avoided or it should not happen in anyone's life. But then life is not sure, life is not the same constant flow altogether. So sometimes there's always an unpredicted event that happens and that completely puts our life off altogether. So that is where the concept of disaster management comes into picture. That's where the concept of the unprecedented thoughts, the concept of how to manage things when suddenly an emergency, an exigency throws out the life out of the gear comes into picture. So we have two types of disaster. One is the natural disaster. The other one is called as the man-made disaster. Now the question that arises is that we all understand that yes, nature has got some fury against us. Nature has got something kept in store for us. But is it true that man himself is responsible for creating a disaster on himself? The answer is yes. Why? Because right from the origin of mankind, we have been trying to destroy the universe. We have been trying to use all the resources and we have been trying to push the mankind to the brink of existence altogether. So that is why man-made disasters are also a part of the disaster management altogether. Now, quickly moving forward, the natural disasters, just have a look into the type of disasters itself that we have been talking about. Floods, droughts, cyclones, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcano, landslide, avalanche, blizzard, a wind chill, or a sandstorm. All these things are a part of the natural disaster. Now let's try to understand each and every one concept here that has been spoken as a part of the natural disaster. The first one called as the floods. Now, what are floods? Basically, a sudden gush of water or a sudden overthrow in the levels of water. What is this flood altogether? Flood is something that is going to come into existence because of the torrential heavy downpour of rain, or because there has been a sudden outburst of a river or a sea that just gushes inside and it causes a height increase in the level of water altogether. Because of which what happens is that water uncontrollably starts flowing into the cities, into the land, creating a problem for the mankind. So flood is one kind of disaster that can really put the life out of gear, that can really put a city or a town or a village into a complete chaos altogether. This excess of water can lead to all kind of problems, loss of life, loss of land, loss of assets, and it can further breed into many other kinds of complexities altogether in the day-to-day life. Next one, drought. This is the opposite of a flood, which I would like to talk about. When there is excessive water, there is definitely a problem. But when there is no water, the problem is even more severe. Now imagine a situation for a while where there is no water at all, which means none of us in this world can ever exist altogether. All of us would completely die, would completely dry out without the life of water. So, drought is a situation where there is a severe shortage of water. The water is not available for the mankind, even for drinking or for agriculture purpose. Automatically, what happens? The land and the nearby areas completely dry out. So, there is absolutely no chance for anybody to continue or to live with it. So automatically now what happens is that there is a severe problem where you might find or you might see that a drought existence has completely led to the downfall, to the complete following in terms of the drought altogether. So drought would definitely create a severe impact into the minds of the people, will create a severe impact in the life of the people, where many of them dry and many of them are led to the position of loss of life without water altogether. The next situation is cyclone. India as a country is prone to cyclones. Why is it prone to cyclone? The answer is quite simple. If you try to understand the cyclonic nature or the low depression that is being caused in the bay areas, in the oceans, in the seas altogether lead to this cyclone. India as a country is surrounded by three sides on water. So on the eastern hemisphere, on the western hemisphere, and at the southern hemisphere, we are surrounded by the water. So we have the Bay of Bengal on the eastern side, the Arabian Sea on the western side, followed by the Indian Ocean on the southern side altogether. So all the three sides, we are surrounded by water. So when we are surrounded by water, it is an equal possibility that moment there is going to be a low depression, or there is going to be a climatic change, or there is going to be a sort of rough weather that starts happening in the oceanic side altogether. The impact can be immediately felt on the coastal cities as well as the land adjoining to this area. Now, what is the effect of cyclone that we are going to talk about towards the city, towards the land altogether? Just for a moment, imagine a wind at a speed of 150 kilometers starts moving towards your city or towards your place, automatically accompanied by a heavy torrential downfall of rain that comes together. We are completely left clueless. Within a fraction of time, within a couple of hours put together, the entire city is devastated. The entire land does not even have a place to stand by altogether, which means to say that the cyclone is going to provide a massive effect on the city, on the people, on the lives, on the assets, on all kind of buildings and everything put together. What happens in the long run is that the cyclone will provide as an effect, as a entire system which will wipe out the complete fraction altogether. So that is why we will say that cyclones can create a devastating effect altogether. Now, earthquakes. We are not new to earthquakes. Cyclones and earthquakes have been repeatedly happening in India and in the adjoining countries altogether. Some of the famous cases, or rather than using the word famous, I would say some of the most heart-warming, heart-deepening cases that have been going all together, the heart-melting scenarios, which I would say happened in a place called Latur in Maharashtra, way back in the year 1991-92, during the time period where more than thousands of people were killed by an earthquake. Recently also there was an earthquake that happened in Nepal, through which a lot of people were killed. Earthquake is again a situation or a natural disaster that is caused because of the seismic dislocation that happens, the collidal of plates that happens all together. So moment there is a dislocation in the seismic plates under the ground, automatically there is a movement of the earth and it cracks open and the land just falls down below. Now this is another a very serious scenario which you would start understanding, where people are left completely clueless. Suddenly the earth opens and you will see that the people just going down the valley. Earthquake is one very common in the country of Japan because of the situation, the land situation, the scenario being built up like that. So that's one of the reasons in Japan people don't build houses made of cement and concrete. But that's not the scenario in India, because we don't believe that earthquake happens on a daily basis or on a frequent basis altogether. So we are a kind of people who get completely disturbed, who get completely taken back when any of these kind of natural disasters that happen to us. Cyclones and floods, we are very common. Why? Because coastal areas like Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, or towards Tamil Nadu, or towards the coastal areas of Karnataka, Maharashtra, which is known for the torrential rainfall, cyclone and floods, have always been, hitting upon India. Recently, the flood that has taken place in Bihar and in Maharashtra are a known news to us. So these kind of things that happen will really create an impact on the mankind and will try to stop the daily walk of life. Moving forward, when we talk about this word called as tsunami, probably tsunami is a word that has not been really known to all of us. The reason being is quite simple, because tsunami is a kind of situation where you see meteoric waves, when you see the big waves suddenly coming out of the sea, pushing right into the cities, right into the middle of the town, and taking away all the assets, all the lives altogether. Tsunami is again happening because of a meteoric displacement that happens several hundreds and thousands of feet below the sea, trying to create a complete seismic dislocation, making the waves way high above rise, and that comes about like 800 meters high, 700 meters high, or a 500-meter high wave coming right across into the city and trying to destroy the things altogether. So this is a kind of natural disaster which is completely unpredictable, and people do not know how to prevent it altogether. So once it starts rising, automatically cities that are located near to the coastal areas, near to the cities, are completely taken back and they do not know how to control it. Followed by volcanoes. We are not very common with the word called as volcanoes because India does not have those kind of mountains which are very prone to volcanoes. But again, volcano is a serious gush of the lava coming out, pouring out in terms of huge terms, and it comes out with a lot of factors with it, and lava comes out with a huge pour altogether, where it just flows down the valley and it really scorches all the villages and the nearby places. So once a volcano outburst happens, that can really affect the cities, that can affect the places and the people nearby, wherein an outburst of fire or a fiery volcano in terms of the molten liquid flowing down can really make the cities or the villages completely go back. Landslides, which are very common when we go to places like Madikeri, or when we are talking about places which are very prone to landslides like Ooty, Kodaikanal and all. Why? Because when you start talking about landslide, it is primarily the land or the soil just getting taken aback by the flow of rainfall, and you will see that huge amount of land, soil just being pushed downwards because of the pour of the rainfall, and this leads to a lot of trouble. You can see that even houses, cattle, men, assets just being taken back from the land altogether because of the serious downpour of water. Avalanche, This is an effect that you can see probably only on the snow areas. So suppose when you are going to talk about areas like Himalayas, or you're going to talk about the areas of Alps or Switzerland and all those places where there is a severe downfall of snow altogether, you can see an avalanche effect. Now, an avalanche effect is even more dangerous because you suddenly see an outburst of snow and ice just falling down across the valley, and it comes and hits at a furious pace, leading to a severe disaster in terms of life and limb, followed by a blizzard or a snowstorm. The snowstorm again is not very common in India. Why? Because these are certain terms and terminologies, if you start understanding, they don't happen in every city of India. This is possibly only towards the northern part of Himalayas, Himachal Pradesh, and all those cold areas where you have those snowy mountains altogether. But then when we talk about blizzard, it is a severe effect because you see a snowstorm coming across with a furious pace, with a huge speed, trying to just cover up the city, putting the city into a white blanket altogether, which leads to a lot of problem to the daily routine life. Followed by wind chill. Of course, yes, you have storms or winds which are with severe weather condition. They literally try to freeze you down in terms of your life, and they affect the normal walk of life. Followed by sandstorms which happen on the deserts. So again, in India, we have a very restricted part of desert, that is the Thar desert, which happens on towards the Rajasthan side. And you would see that at the Thar desert, suddenly there is a rising in terms of the sandstorm, where you would see that a huge flow of wind carrying the sand particles trying to affect the life of people. Now, with this factor, let us try to move forward in terms of the man-made disasters. Now, natural disasters are something that cannot be controlled by us, that cannot be held by us, because natural disasters do not have any sort of controlling factors. They are something which are created by God, they are created by nature, so we don't have a direct control on them. But what about the man-made disasters like explosions, leakage from toxic chemicals, or we are talking about pollution, deforestation, dam failure, wars, weapons, biological, chemical weapons, and all those kind of factors altogether. Now, when you look at these things, these are even more dangerous in nature. Let's try to understand the impact of each and everything from the scenario one. Explosions. Now, when you see about the word explosion, this is primarily not just because of a bomb attack or by only talking about missiles or any other kind of thing. Now, an explosion can happen even because of an LPG cylinder altogether. So what is this explosion that we are talking about? It is because of a man-made activity or a man-made innovation which comes under a severe pressure and just explodes out of control. Automatically, it leads to a fear, it leads to a loss of life, and hundreds and thousands of people just go down without having anything in their hands altogether. So this is a scenario, this is a situation which I would like to talk about, which creates some sort of fear, some sort of a disadvantage in the life of people. Leakage of toxic chemicals. We have not forgotten the issue of Bhopal tragedy case, the case of the group where Union Carbide Company had led to the leakage of toxic chemicals in Bhopal in the year 1984, where hundreds and thousands of people died because of the leakage of the carbon monoxide that happened altogether and the methyl isocyanate. Now, these kind of gases can definitely lead to the death of hundreds and thousands of people. Again, a man-made disaster. Even now in Bhopal, the effect of this man-made disaster is being found altogether. So this is where I would say the leakage of toxic chemicals is one area where we need to be very careful. If we have not kept the systems properly, if we have not checked our industries properly, if we have not kept a control system properly, definitely it lead to the loss of life altogether. Followed by pollution, a very common problem, but yes, it has got a severe impact in terms of the disaster management altogether. Why? Because it can affect the regular walk of life. Now look at cities like Delhi or Mumbai, or if you, for example, Hyderabad, Lucknow, Bangalore, where the pollution levels have been going to a very, very great extent due to the vehicular movement or due to the industries or due to the toxic flames that have been released. This is directly affecting the breathing of human beings, by which most of the people started feeling that they cannot live in any of these cities due to the congestion and due to the pollution that has been created. So it is the right time that man has to start checking out on the pollution controls. They have to start finding out methods to reduce this pollution altogether, because more the pollution, we will not be able to live in peace. We will not be able to control ourselves, and our day-to-day life will come under complete jeopardy. So this is the area where we need to work and where we need to reduce the pollution in the coming years. Deforestation and forest fires, though these factors are very common to us, but yes, this has been happening on a day-to-day basis on most of our cases and most of our scenarios. Followed by the dam failure. Of course, there have been times when dams have just broken open, they've just come across in a big gushing way, just destroyed the places altogether. And this was quite found in places like, where we find that the dams have not been built properly, the dams have not been under control of the human being, and they have just gone ahead and they have destroyed. Wars, weapons of mass destruction. Let's understand that India as a country has been spending a lot of money on acquiring defense weapons and making of the defense items altogether. So we are interested in making of missiles, tanks and bombs and everything, but then we need to be understanding very clearly that these weapons can come back to us as a mass destruction area altogether. So tomorrow if a war breaks out, or if there is going to be a nuclear breakout, or there is going to be a destruction that has been caused by those missiles or by those weapons, that can have a far-reaching impact on the human life cycle altogether, followed by biological weapons that we have done and the chemical weapons that we have been talking about in the system. Now, the biological weapons and chemical weapons will have a life-crippling effect, which can actually make the people life even more disastrous altogether. So now, moving forward, we are going to talk about the impact of disaster. So there are several impacts of a disaster, starting with the social impact altogether. What is the social impact of a disaster? Social impact of a disaster refer to the tangible and intangible effects of the society and the expenses to rebuild the society to the stage before that disaster actually happened. So, you can probably see what are the issues that are going to happen: mental health issues, alcohol misuse, domestic violence, chronic diseases, and short-term unemployment. Before we start discussing about this, now let's try to understand the impact that happens into the human system or the human psychology altogether. Now, what is the meaning of a social impact? A social impact is one where you see that the disaster is either on the tangible or intangible, which means to say that both quantifiable and the quality-oriented factor. And there would be an impact created on the society, and we will not be able to rebuild the society back to the normal condition as it was. Now, for example, if I have to tell, coronavirus itself has created such an impact on the society that today people are fearing to go from one place to another. People are fearing to go to any kind of functions. They are fearing to attend any kind of activity altogether. Though there might be festivals coming in, though there might be social gatherings happening, but people are not ready to take risk and go back into the society. Their normal life is completely affected. Their normal thought process is completely affected. It has started creating a fear factor into the lives of the people. Now, because of which, what happens here is that the community, the people who are living in the community, tend to pick up different kinds of habit, tend to pick up different kinds of social depression altogether, and that starts severely affecting their life. Now, for example, because of getting into depression, because of continuous work from home, because of being isolated in places, because of being staying at home itself, there can be mental health issues for women as well as for men. There can be alcohol abuse that can come into picture because you are idle state, you are just completely depressed, you want to overcome that scenario, you get into alcohol abuse. There can be domestic violence out of depression. People are not happy, they want to express that anger, they want to express that fear, they want to express that discontent on other family members. So there will be domestic violence that can come up. Similarly, chronic diseases that can come up because of staying at home, your mental pressure, you might develop any kind of chronic diseases altogether, and there might be a short-term unemployment. I'm totally out of gear in terms of employment. I'm not happy with the lifestyle. I don't want to continue this job, so I just give up on the job, and that leads to a short-term unemployment altogether. So this is a scenario that you can see the impact of disaster from the social side altogether. Moving forward, we have the economic impact. Any of the disaster will directly have an economic impact altogether. So any disaster that destroys tangible assets like buildings, equipment will have a short-term economic impact altogether. So what is going to happen is that the cost of the disaster will rise exponentially with economic development. Disasters will affect the infrastructure of the community, and all other projects that have been going and the funds required are stopped, and again the reconstruction and rehabilitation happens. Now, imagine when a tsunami breaks in, or for example, a cyclone that happened in Odisha last year. What happened because of this factor is that the entire city gets completely destroyed. The buildings are thrown out, there is no electricity, there is no water, the roads are broken, suddenly the houses get damaged. For all this, there is an economic cost in rebuilding the society, in rebuilding the lifestyle again. Which means for the government, for the people, and for the society, it becomes a very big challenge in rebuilding the system altogether. Again, a lot of money is needed. There is a cost overhead that starts going up. People have to get involved, they have to start things from the scratch, they have to rebuild the society, they have to get back to normalcy. Everything will have a cost factor involved in that. So that's why I say the economic impact of a disaster is even more severe than the physical impact that happens on any human being in totality altogether. Now, moving forward, political impacts. What are the political impacts of a disaster? Government should be ready. They should be aware of any of the political disaster. Most of the time, government should know what exactly is happening in terms of disaster, which is not known. If a government has done a poor performance in terms of responding to a disaster, automatically the government will be voted out of power by the people. Now, in the scenario, in the case that has been happening in India, currently the central government has been trying to come up with various plans and schemes, coordinating with the state government in terms of curbing the pandemic as far as possible. Recently, there has also been a good news stating that India has slowly started coming down the curve in terms of the infection altogether. So somewhere down the lane, the role of government is very, very important in terms of curbing a particular act or a particular situation. If the government is not able to control, if the government is not able to understand the scenario, they're not able to handle the pressure that has been given, automatically the government will fail, and the political image of the party and the respect and trust will start coming down. This will lead to a scenario where the disaster will also start giving you a greater risk, plus the instability of government in the mind of people can give even more far-reaching impact. Now, moving forward, We will also talk about the environmental effect. What is the impact of disaster on environment? Definitely, they cause a temporary as well as a permanent impact. Now, for example, let us take earthquake itself. They modify the topography of the land or of the terrain. Volcanoes can release several tons of carbon dioxide and other toxic gases. In addition, they can destroy the local landscape and other factors. Now, let's say that when we talk about floods, when we talk about this earthquake or volcano, if it happens, immediately the geography of the nation, the geography of the land itself comes under question mark. So let's say, for example, there is an earthquake that happens quite close to Taj Mahal in India. We might lose out on the monument itself. Suppose an earthquake happens near Qutub Minar, we can lose out the entire monument. A flood happens somewhere near the gateway of India, then probably that could entirely destroy the building. So the environmental impact is very, very severe. What can happen is that we cannot again rebuild these monuments or the systems that have been given to us by our ancestors. So the environmental effect is a far-reaching impact that will go all the way, and they can change the topography, they can change the land system or behavior altogether. So it's very, very important that we spend time in terms of understanding this scenario altogether. Moving forward, the health impact. This is the most important or the crucial factor that we need to understand as a part of the disaster management. What is the health impact? Disasters impact the health of affected people in several ways. People may suffer from physical injuries. They may also suffer from temporary or permanent injuries altogether, psychological, or they suffer from mental illness. The health effects are lasting much longer than the disaster itself. The health effects of a disaster are unavoidably linked to the social and the economic effects of the disaster. So it is very, very important for all of us to understand the impact of the health factor. Now, suddenly when a bridge collapses and falls down, or an earthquake happens, or a building falls down, or a flood happens, people lose their lives completely. Now, that is one way excusable, because nature has created a plan for you and you are dead altogether. But then, if you lose your limb, or you lose your hand, or you lose a part of your body, and you are being asked to stay like this for the next years to come, that is a severe health impact altogether that you can see here. So that is why the health impact can cause a far more mental effect altogether that can destroy the life cycle of a mankind. So every disaster has to be mitigated properly, has to be handled properly, so that the health impact is not far-reaching. Now, in the case of the COVID-19, most of the people have got mentally affected rather than the physical impact itself. The fear factor, the thought of getting into that disease, the thought of getting into that infection has made most of them just lie down altogether. They have started getting into the fear psychology. What if I would be the next victim altogether? So this kind of mental pressure, psychological depression, can definitely affect the lifestyle of people. Moving forward, psychological impacts altogether, or the psychosocial impacts. Now, the psychosocial impacts refers to the effect that is caused by the environment on social or on the psychological aspect altogether. So several psychiatric disorders may affect an individual life, which leads to depression, extreme stress, anxiety, or to the mental diseases altogether. Why is this happening altogether is that in a normal walk of life, man always wants to be independent. Man always wants to be in a scenario where he is not depressed, where he is not carried forward by any kind of activity. But then over a period of time, man starts thinking that if any of the calamity happens and that starts affecting his life, he might not be able to lead a normal life. His financial aspects, his family, his members, friends, everybody might get departed away from him. So this leads to a mental stress. This leads to a depression altogether. Suddenly he starts feeling that he might be isolated as an island. So all kinds of social stress, socio-psychological disorders can create an impact into a human being, which can throw man out of gear altogether. Now, moving forward, with this, we come to the conclusion of session 2 of disaster management. I hope and believe that this session was interesting, useful, and informative. In the coming sessions, we will be trying to understand the far more reaching consequences of disaster management. Until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today.